This week's Irish Farmers Journal podcast is brought to you by MartBids, your new free-to-download app providing farmers with the details of every animal before it enters the sales ring. MartBids. Trade smarter. Trade safer.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Hannah Quinn-Mulligan. Coming up on the show this week.
I'm therefore pleased to announce the launch of a future growth loan scheme for the SME and agriculture and food sector. Government will bring new legislation to implement this scheme to provide up to €300 million.
We'll be taking a look back at Budget 2019 and what it means for farmers.
I'm fighting for the women who are struggling, who can't pay the bills, who's dealing with their husbands, with depression, with just at hitting rock bottom. In the end of the day, we're the ones that's trying to pay the bills, fight with the banks, fight with the co-ops.
And getting militant at a beef protest in Monaghan. But first, unless you've been lucky enough to be living under a rock without internet access, you'll be aware that it is budget week. But what does this mean for farmers? Well, there was a flutter of excitement that quickly turned into a Ferrari when Minister for Finance Paschal Donohoe announced a new agri-loan scheme in the Dáil during his budget speech yesterday.
SMEs provide most of our employment, and additional government support for this sector is crucial in the light of Brexit. I'm therefore pleased to announce the launch of a future growth loan scheme for the SME and agriculture and food sector. Government will bring new legislation to implement this scheme to provide up to €300 million.
Was this new money? Was it going to appear before the low-cost loan scheme that was promised in last year's budget? Well, the Farmers Journal office was all aflutter. Lucky then, perhaps, that Minister for Agriculture Michael Creed was able to bring us back down to earth at his press conference on Wednesday.
Just lest there be any uncertainty around it, the 25 million is not being double counted as part of our Brexit resilience. We will pay the 25 million that we got in budget 2018, as in this time last year for 2018. We will pay that over in terms of developing the product and but because of the involvement of the European Investment Fund, the AG's advice is that this requires legislation to get the product up and running. And because it's a collaboration, or to get the loan product up and running, because it's a collaboration then between essentially my department and Minister Humphrey's department, but also the Department of Finance, Minister Humphreys, I expect, will be bringing a memo to government shortly on the matter. I don't expect that there will be any difficulty with the legislation. Whether at this stage it forms part of the finance bill or is standalone legislation is unclear, but we don't expect any undue delay.
So, there you have it. Now, stitching all the bits of the jigsaw together, the Farmers Journal understands that the €6 million announced by Paschal Donohoe for this new agri-loan scheme will be rolled into the €25 million promised in last year's budget. That loan scheme will make an appearance in Q1 of 2019, only about a year and a half after it was first announced. However, it wasn't all bad news in the budget for farmers. Farm Assist recipients will receive an extra €5 per week. Income averaging has been rolled out to farmers with an off-farm income. Area of natural constraint payments will see a €23 million boost back to pre-recession levels. And perhaps most excitingly, a new suckler payment will be introduced. The new Beef Environment Efficiency Pilot, or BEEP for short, will involve the weighing of cows and calves to ensure a €40 payment per weanling. Here's Minister Creed explaining some of the details of the new €20 million scheme.
As you know, currently under the Beef Data and Genomics Programme, under the RDP, we've about 25,000 farmers in that scheme. What this is, I think, is a logical development, a further development of that, insofar as it's incentivising the collection of further data that's not in any significant volume currently available to BDGP or to the ICBF through the BDGP scheme. So what it will involve is getting data on the weanling efficiency of the suckler herd. And weanling efficiency is determined as the weight of the weanling relative to the weight of the suckler cow. As I said earlier, the journey really is to get a smaller beef cow, smaller therefore being more economically efficient, producing a bigger weanling. And the more data we can get in that context is going to accelerate the development of a genetically more efficient beef herd. So this scheme will pay on the assumption of 500,000 weanlings participating. Our farmers applying on 500,000 weanlings, it will deliver a payment of €40 per weanling on that basis. It is not confined to just those in BDGP at the moment. It will be available to all suckler farmers. But in the event that obviously there are greater numbers than 500,000 weanlings applying, some kind of self-selection criteria would have to be applied because the funding is 20 million. But I think it is really an important development of that BDGP principle and improving the genetic merit, because it's compatible with our climate change obligations, which are really important.
Now, the people handy with calculators in the office tell me that the €20 million fund is enough for about 500,000 animals. I'm no mathematician, but there are considerably more than that amount of suckler cattle in the country. So we'll see what happens there. You might also remember that some 44,000 people signed a petition calling for a €200 suckler cow payment. I put this to point to TD Charlie McConalogue, a Fianna Fáil spokesperson for agriculture, after the budget was read out yesterday.
Farming vote is always important, and €40 per suckler cow is not €200 per suckler cow. This is the last budget under the Confidence and Supply Agreement. Is that going to carry some weight going forward?
Yeah, well, make no mistake, where we want to go and what we believe is needed is a €200 payment per suckler cow. We're quite flexible, as I've indicated to Minister Creed on many occasions, as to how we deliver that and the mechanism for it. But the bottom line is it has to benefit farmers and get to farmers and not be going in one door and out the other door. So we certainly have our stall strongly set out to achieve €200. Minister has resisted that, but I think today is welcome in the sense that it does give a pointer that even Minister Creed is seeing that this is something which is important, because farmers really across the country in the beef sector have been looking to this budget, going to people as the government hearing is at all, and is there a recognition of the pressure that we're under.
There was some provision made for loans for the agricultural sector as well. Is it any clear on whether these will be new loans or based on the loans that were promised in last year's budget?
Well, I don't think anyone will be holding their breath given Minister Creed in particular's performance. There was this time last year there was 25 million allocated in the budget to go towards the farming sector and Brexit, and it simply hasn't been delivered. And in fact, he's indicated recently that it won't be available until spring next year. I'm not sure if he needs to be reminded that Brexit, in the event of a hard Brexit, is due to happen in March. But it's been a real failure in their regard. We will be seeking clarification in relation to the plans, in relation to the various loans that are out there. We think they are important, that they do work. We think and we advocated there should be a loan brought into play to actually help the farming community in relation to the current cost and merchant credit, for example, that a lot of them are carrying to help them get through the next number of months as a tool to deal with the fodder crisis. We'd also felt it was important to put a contingency in place in relation to hardship for the potential fodder crisis that we're facing into this winter, and that hasn't been done, and that's something that may have to be revisited over the course of the coming months. We certainly hope not, but I think it is a big failure on their behalf that we haven't seen more in relation to the low-income loans.
Charlie McConalogue there. And if you've reached your budget quota for the week or even the year, don't worry, I'm about to move on to budget-free topics. But for all you budget boffins, we have a special budget special podcast, which you can download for free from our website with news and a full report from the day. It's excellent and goes very well with a cup of tea and a chocolate hobnob. Well, last Friday I was up bright and early to cover an Irish Cattle and Sheep Association beef protest outside ABP Clonus in County Monaghan. About 40 farmers staged a protest at the factory, creating a go-slow for hauliers and farmers coming and going from the factory with livestock. Now, there were some heated exchanges, but one of the farmers in attendance was no less than Corrib Lady Farmer of the Year, Mona O'Donoghue Concannon, and she explained to me why the protest was so important to her.
I'm fighting for the women, basically. I'm sick of listening to women who are struggling, who can't pay the bills, who's dealing with their husbands with depression, with just hitting rock bottom. And I suppose because I'm an ICSA, I have been given the opportunity to come out here and stand for women in ag and to be there to be counted, because in the end of the day we're the ones that's trying to pay the bills, fight with the banks, fight with the co-ops, and they're not listening, so we have to do something. So that's why I'm here.
And what are you hoping comes out of today?
Sure, we have to be seen to be fighting, and if we don't fight, we're at nothing. So I hope there's an increase in price, but at least for them to come and talk to us and realise the impact they're having on farm families, because I don't think they realise how important it is, the price for families. Like, there's kids going back to school, going back to college, and people just don't have money. So we're just here fighting, and we need an income. In the end of the day, Ireland is about farm families, and if we don't have farm families, we have nothing. So I hope that they see that we mean business, and this is only the first of many, So unfortunately, we're out here this morning, and we're going to stay out until they realise the impact they're having both on mental health, on society. And it's not fair, kids struggling to go back to school because their parents can't afford it because of the bad prices. It's been a bad year, and it's about time now that even the government, they need to sit up and stand up and start looking after the people that's been looking after them since the bailout happened.
And you've been farming as well, I'd say, for a number of years now. I mean, how does this year compare to other years of farming? Yeah,
I've been full-time farming with my husband and my brother for nearly 10 years, and it has been the worst year. Since the springtime, it just has been one thing after another, and it's very hard to get up in the morning and get out and try and do things. But look, we have to do it. The animals have to be fed, the milk has to go, the beef has to go, so it's just, we have to get up and get it out, whether we want to get up, and we don't have money in the banks, but we still have to do it, you know what I mean? We don't have a choice. The animals are dependent on us, and the economy is dependent on us, so there's nothing we can do about it.
Mona O'Donoghue Concannon there, who is a lovely woman with the dubious honour of having a name even longer than my own. The protest itself dispersed just after 11 a.m, but the ICSA promised they would continue protests if beef prices didn't improve. Now, last week, Teagasc held their inaugural Alumnus of the Year award. They presented the award to Professor Andrew Fisher, who explained the research he'd carried out to my colleague Odile Evans as part of his Teagasc Walsh Fellowship back in 1996.
So my research here in Ireland was on beef cattle management and welfare, and we looked at two issues. One was identifying an appropriate stocking density during the winter housing period for beef cattle. There was a bit of discussion, including potential legislation from Brussels at the time, about what minimum space allowances could be, and we felt that was going to have implications for Irish farmers who often have a limited winter housing period. And so we did research on identifying appropriate stocking densities for cattle during winter housing. And the other issue we worked on was looking at castration methods for beef cattle and minimising the impact of castration in terms of animal stress.
Okay, so quite advanced in terms of animal welfare now where we are today in 2018 and what we're looking at. So that was something else I wanted to ask you. Like, you're working in Australia now, where there's quite a strong animal welfare lobby in terms of live exports. How do you deal with that day to day, or do you feed into that at all? Well, research has to come out on top of it, doesn't it?
Look, that's true. So I don't do a lot of direct research into live export, though I do currently serve on a government technical advisory panel about live export. Live export is a really difficult problem because from an animal welfare perspective, because the direction of the livestock supply chain is completely separate to the direction of welfare concern. So the livestock go overseas, often to the Middle East and similar countries, and the direction of the welfare concern is with the Australian public. And so therefore you don't have that normal alignment where the consumer demands the welfare standards that then come along the supply chain because someone's prepared to pay more for it. And so live export, I think, is very challenging, particularly for sheep that go from southern Australia to the Middle East. And, it's probably going to be a work in progress to see whether that particular aspect of the industry will continue to occur.
Yeah, because it's even where, the research that's being conducted by Teagasc or any research body and how it feeds into industry and also public concerns, all of that is a big area that I suppose with, communication so instant now that everything has to feed into that.
Absolutely, and I think one of the other challenges we have is where research is seen to be funded or co-funded by industry. Sometimes in the animal welfare space, that creates a problem of perceptions. People say, well, it was funded by industry and therefore it shows that. And I don't know any researcher, and I don't really know any industry funder, whether it's been here in Ireland or in other countries, that have sought to kind of influence the results in any way. It's really about finding out knowledge, and I don't think we should be scared of knowledge. And I'd say that also to industries who sometimes are a bit reluctant to, we don't want to know about that in case it throws up some can of worms. At some point that can of worms is going to be opened anyway. And I think we're better off knowing about it and being prepared and having in place, improvement strategies than trying to pretend it's never going to be, exposed.
Stay tuned, because coming up we hear why a free Jersey bull calf should come with €165 and why Rabobank is so interested in agriculture.
Suckler and sheep farmers to get more money from Budget 2019. This week's Irish Farmers Journal can exclusively reveal details of how farmers can earn an extra €40 per suckler cow in a new support scheme. Find out how farmers on marginal land will be able to secure extra income under the ANC scheme. And our focus on winter fodder looks at the most effective ways to bridge the feed gap this winter. Learn what the budget means for you and your farm family's income, only inside this week's Farmers Journal, on sale today.
This week, a global roundtable for sustainable beef took place in Kilkenny. Beef and carbon have been in the news recently, and our correspondent Phelim O'Neill met with Justin Sherrard of Rabobank and asked him what the forum could do to address climate concerns.
I want to be clear here that I think the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a fantastic group, and it brings together the right people on the right sets of issues. But the reality for us is that if we're going to have this discussion around the future of emissions from animal-based farming, from livestock industries around the world, we also need to have that discussion within the climate change policy and science community, within government circles as well. And I question whether the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, which is ultimately trying to define what sustainability is and to make that a consumer-accessible concept, should also be the group that has that responsibility for engaging with the science community, etc.
And do you feel as an industry, as a sector, that we are sufficiently engaged with government, with science, etc. on that debate?
No, I don't. And
how can we improve it?
Well, I think the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to understand the arguments which are being put against us. Not the ones that we would say, but we've got to understand why it is that people think that this would be a good idea to stop livestock farming around the world. And so we've got to put ourselves in their shoes and say they're looking for an easy answer here, and then we've got to push back on those things and inform them about the contribution that livestock farming can make to reducing emissions. So it shouldn't be about eliminating an industry, it should be about reducing emissions, because that might seem like a subtle difference, but it's an important difference, because the mandate of that international community trying to address the challenges of a warming world is to reduce the drivers of that warming process, to reduce the emissions which are contributing to that. We as an industry are land managers. We manage landscapes, we manage soils, we manage vegetation on soils. We've got an incredible job that we can play in the whole carbon cycle. Eliminate livestock farming, and actually you may find that you suddenly start emitting a whole lot more carbon into the atmosphere than you ever reckoned, because you never recognised the role that farmers are playing in land management of carbon.
I suppose moving in on the bit that really is of interest to Irish farmers, and I suspect farmers across the world in what are quite difficult trading times, is the economic sustainability. In your presentation this morning, you did confidently say that people would continue to eat beef. Do you visualise that will be across the world? Where do you see, and where does Rabobank see is the markets with great growth potential, and how far can those go in terms of delivering sustained or better farm gate prices in Ireland and indeed for farmers across the world?
So we've got a situation here where, as we look towards the future, we see the people who will increase their beef consumption are in emerging economies, especially in Asia, Southeast Asia, China, other parts of Asia, and to a certain extent in parts of Latin America, and to a certain extent in parts of Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, and also Sub-Saharan Africa. So the future of beef consumption growth is not here in Ireland. In fact, it's not even in Europe. It's in other parts of the world. So that tells us we're going to have to compete to get our role to maintain and grow a presence in those export markets. And you could say to the beef processors and the traders, then they've got a job to actually understand how to compete in those markets. And I would say they also have a job to work with the whole supply chain to make sure that the product that we're delivering is going to be well rewarded in those markets. Because the sort of beef that you want in sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, for example, may not be the same beef that you want to consume here in Ireland. And at the moment, I think most Irish farmers probably have Ireland as their reference point for the kind of consumption of beef. How do Irish people like to consume beef? And that's what they're thinking. We all need to become a little bit more aware of those destination markets in the future, and we need to learn how to adapt our supply chains to measure up to whatever requirements those destination markets will impose on us.
Justin Gerard there. Staying on the vein of climate change, our correspondent Thomas Hubert spoke to Marie Donnelly, former head of renewable energy at the European Commission, about ambitious industry targets that could involve small-scale producers, including farmers.
So firstly, I think the objective of 70% renewables by 2030 is an entirely achievable number. We have the technical capacity in this country, and we can deliver this in a cost-effective way, and I think that's very important. I believe farmers have a huge role to play. If I take as an illustration, there was a survey done in 2012, so some years ago, in Germany. And at that point in time, 50% of the PV panels in Germany were owned by farmers.
So that's photovoltaic solar panels on roofs? Yes,
mainly on their barns, frankly. And today, Germany produces 9% of its electricity from solar panels. So I think just taking that one very small action, it's an illustration of how farmers can also be part of this energy transition.
And there's also maybe a more psychological aspect, or the fact that you don't want to be too remote from that industry. And you talked about the way consumers or regular people can be involved. How is that possible?
Well, what I was saying, basically, there's two ways. One is to become part of the energy transition. And I think farmers are particularly fortunate in that respect because they will have outhouses and buildings, so they do have roof space that they can use, for example, for PV panels, so they can generate power. And they can use some of that power themselves for their milking machines and vacuum pumps and other things that they have. And the balance then would be sold into the grid. The second thing is, and this is such a really almost a simple thing, to control when you use energy. Because when we have lots and lots of wind, energy in the energy system is really very cheap. So, of course, the idea would be, let's use energy when it's very cheap and not use it when it's very expensive. And this is where the smart meter comes in. And a smart meter allows you to manage your consumption of energy in the most cost-effective way. And I know farmers are good at doing that, and that, I think, is a real opportunity for them.
There seems to be a tension, I suppose, between what you're talking about, which is that everybody would get involved and farmers especially could contribute, and government policy seems to be favouring the cheapest watt of energy generated from renewable sources, and that's always going to be the bigger investment, the multinational coming in with a big wind farm or something like that. So can we do it cost effectively and yet involve the farmers and the local communities?
Well, it's true that scale tends to be cheaper. I mean, this is why we have factories that can produce products, because they can usually do it in a more efficient way. And I think we should do that. I have to say that, a lot of the investment is actually done by Irish companies, not necessarily multinationals coming in. So it is an Irish investment. But this energy transition will only be successful if we use all of the different possibilities. So it's never going to be solved with just one system or one mechanism. And yes, we're right to go for the most cost effective, but sometimes you do have to mix the technologies. So, for example, it can be as cost effective to produce energy locally and use it locally, as opposed to having to transport it, say, across the country at the cost of more pylons and infrastructure investment in order to carry it. So I think this is an element that we have to take into account in terms of looking at what it actually costs. Because sometimes you can get economies of scale, yes, with the larger ones, but equally local production and local consumption is also cost effective.
Thomas Hubert speaking to Marie Donnelly. Well, from beef carbon footprint to beef prices. I went to an ICSA event in Mullingar Park Hotel on Tuesday night, where farmers were given a presentation by Kepak and Thompson's Feeds on how to get the best out of finishing animals. I spoke to ICSA General Secretary Eddie Punch about the ongoing concerns around low beef prices at the minute and the perceived influence of dairy beef on the suckler herd.
You can only squeeze so much blood out of the turnip, and we're saying it is totally unacceptable that people are expected to work for nothing. It is not just going to continue like this. Farmers can't put up with it any longer. Labour, there's lots of rewards for labour throughout other sectors. It is high time that, we got a reward for labour. There will be no young people in beef production in a few years if we don't have a sustainable margin. And look, retailers and processors like to talk about sustainability all the time now. It's the buzzword: environmental sustainability, animal welfare sustainability. There is no sustainability unless we have economic sustainability. That's got to be our starting point. Without economic sustainability, everything else is pie in the sky.
There's been some talk about the dairy influence on suckler herd, and Jonathan Forbes of KeyPack mentioned that if you got a Jersey bull calf for free, you'd want to get €165 with them to make anything out of it at the end. Were you surprised by that?
No. I've been saying for quite some time now that Chaggis's assessment of dairy farm economics is flawed, and beef farmers themselves have a flawed analysis of the kind of calves that's coming out of the dairy herd. We need proper economics here, and there's a minus value on most of the kind of Jersey cross. And by the way, an awful lot of what is supposedly Frisian bulls that are being used in the dairy systems now are actually half Jersey, or they have a percentage Jersey. All of this kind of stock is completely a disaster. And we have got to get real figures around what a farmer should be paid to take that stock. It's ludicrous expecting people, even who take them away for free. They're not a paying proposition. And I think, there's a real question mark about the New Zealandisation of dairy breeding in a country that is so dependent on beef. And I think we need to look at systems of dairying where, proper quality calves that have some beef merit are part of the system. In New Zealand, these bull calves are slaughtered at birth. It's not a road we want to go down in Ireland, but that's the real economics. And expecting people to feed these calves, it's just, I think it's farcical.
Is the consumer answerable as well? There was a lot of talk there about steak specification. Should consumers be more open to taking steak that's maybe a different size?
It's a bit like this argument goes on about a lot of products, vegetables, tomatoes, all that.
The wonky veggie box.
Yeah. I mean, we've got to get real here. The one size fits all, in my view, is causing serious inefficiencies and is contributing actually to things like food waste. Not everybody wants to buy 2 steaks for a tenner. Some of us would actually like a slightly bigger steak. And this has been allowed to get a kind of a attraction or a kind of a popular culture. If the suckler herd is expected to slaughter cattle at low weights, and we heard tonight that the ideal heifer carcass is 330 kilos. This is one of the single biggest things that is undermining the suckler industry, because the suckler farmer must be averaging €1,000 for his weanling. If that's not available to suckler farmers, there is no sustainability in suckler farming, and there is no subsidy that will make up for the fact that if the finisher can't grow that animal into sufficient weight to pay €1,000 for the weanling, then the business is totally unviable.
And that's it for this week. Thanks again for tuning in. And just to let you know as well that we're going through all the feedback from the podcast survey. I'm enjoying reading the comments, one of which says, keep it real and don't be afraid of being too politically correct. And in the interest of not being politically correct, I'm going to say the B word one more time. Just to plug the Budget Special podcast. Remember, you can stay in touch via Twitter or Facebook. The sound engineer this week was Ferdy Mooney, and I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan.
We hope you enjoyed this week's Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by MartBids. Download the MartBids app now and see what you're missing. The cattle aren't free, but the app is. MartBids. Trade safer. Trade smarter.